Welcome everyone to an episode of New Color Progressives, the place where we seek to promote productive and meaningful conversations on the multifaceted aspects of our culture. I am your host, Sam Budd, or @BamStud on Instagram. There are a number of ways where you all can be connected to our new content, from following us on Facebook, where we'll be sending out updates about new videos, subscribing to our YouTube channel, where you can watch our video content, and finding us on Patreon, where not only can you access our podcast audio versions of videos, but you can even pledge monthly financial support for as little as $2, $3, $4, or even more dollars. All links will be in the description. Our hope is to build this channel from a part-time gig to a full-time thing where we can cover more and more interesting topics, like the recent school shootings, conspiracy theories, and even reacting to the new Black Panther movie. So, with that underway, let's get to today's topic, which is the 5 types of Trump supporters. Today I'm introducing...
Jeff James.
All right, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate you having
You are
me.
Indeed the founder of it, so...
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So might as well.
I am big.
So this is interesting. You came up with 5 types of Trump supporters. The disenfranchised, the traditionalists, pro-birthers, evangelical crusaders, and the deplorables.
Yep.
So first up, before we even get into any of those, I was curious with kind of how we got that list. Like, where did these 5 supporters come from?
Yeah, I think it started where, at my previous place of employment, me and a few people, we would always have these political conversations and debates and everything. But I started to realize that a lot of the people who couldn't imagine, A, why personally Donald Trump was running, and B, why he was popular, they couldn't understand, and they were struggling with, I think, lumping everyone in that supported him as being a racist. And the more and more I looked into it, I started to realize, both on social media and in the news, people were pretty lazy about showing only one side of it, which is they're showing all the people at the parade, at the parades and the conventions and everything that was about Trump, and then when you put a mic in front of them, they were just like, oh, Mexicans,
yeah,
and and in reality, when I started to look deeper and start looking at what it was, what were some of the things that was drawing people towards him, I started to realize that there was a lot more nuance to it than simply, oh, they just hate black people. This is why, or they were so angry and upset about a black man being in office for the last 8 years. They'll accept any piece of white, what. And I heard that from a lot of black folks, and I heard that from a lot of liberals as well, liberal white folks as well. So the more and more I started to research it, I started to realize, okay, there's at least 4, if not 5, major reasons for why people felt like, in good conscience, they were making a better choice with voting for him than voting for Hillary.
Yeah, there you go, man. Yeah, I think that was a huge issue with just trying to, like, everybody who supported Trump being a racist just isn't the reality. No. But it was kind of the thing that was painted to a lot of us through media for a really long time. Yeah,
and in fact, I'll go so far as to say that it was laziness on our part by accepting that. It took Donald Trump accusing everything of being fake news for a lot of liberals and independents like myself to look back and be like, okay, so the media doesn't have a huge say on how information is given to us, and if anything, if they're filtering the way in which we're receiving information, and they're also impacting our perception of not only our politics but the world around us and the people around us. So that's when I started to realize I have to go beyond what Fox News or CNN or MSNBC is saying, and start delving in a little bit deeper into what is the statistics saying, what are the exit polls saying, what are actual people that are for him saying. And that's when I started to realize, okay, there's at least 4, if not 5 major categories.
That's interesting too, because especially with how the election went, just percentage wise, you started to realize, like, oh man, I mean, come on, not 50% of this country is racist. And that's kind of like just interesting, kind of just looking at that, because the media was wrong in a sense, and actually kind of like almost made us doubt this candidate.
And it didn't even account for all the non-white folks that voted for him as well, including the people who previously had voted for Barack Obama. Like, that's a whole segment that just doesn't get any news coverage, at least on liberal networks, which is like, there were actually actual people that voted for him once, if not twice.
Yeah.
And that were so unhappy with how Washington and the executive branch handled things over the last 8 years that they really thought they needed to change things with trying something different.
Do you know like any like ballpark percentage of like what kind of turnover rate that was for like Obama?
Well, we don't have any. I don't know if we'll ever know that for sure, because when you're going off of exit polls, it's really not whether or not people are going to be truthful, and then a lot of people don't want to be open about who or what, you know, type of platform they decided to choose to vote for or go with. But what I will say is that a lot of the people that were unhappy over the last 8 years, their options for many of them was either voting for him or not voting at all. Or voting third party, like for Jill Stein or someone else. Yeah. So a key person like myself, I had voted for Barack Obama in 2008 for the first time, and the second time I didn't vote at all, because I started to recognize that that his platform, like all politicians, never ends up matching their, you know, actual presidency. And I started to view him as just another politician that's a really, really great communicator versus a transformative figure that beyond symbolically who he represented, I didn't see him addressing a lot of the things that I cared about. Yeah. So when it came time for, you know, this most recent election between Hillary and Trump, I was like, she's a further extension of the things that I'm unhappy about with him, and he's an embarrassment. So therefore, I couldn't, in good conscience, vote for either of them. Yeah. A lot of people who felt like they had to vote couldn't, or that they had to vote for one of the two. Right. Sounded very similar to me, and I think that's what led to the first group, which was the disenfranchised. Yeah. Absolutely. That group, you know, starting with just white Americans, 11 million of them were using some type of form of welfare subsidies. So this notion that it's just a bunch of ungrateful white people that are just upset about a black man that was in office for the last 8 years. Yeah. No, a lot of them were upset because they're still on welfare. Yeah. And they were on welfare before he got there, or were put on after he got there. And right, wrong, or indifferent, they viewed his administration and the people that were, you know, in power as partly responsible for why that happened, as jobs were outsourced under his presidency, just like all the other presidents. It's kind of like if bad things are happening and you happen to be the person in charge, well, you're the one that's going to get the blame when it's time for another election. Yeah. And then on top of that, you know, I think nearly half of his supporters were college educated, which was the other thing that I think
that was the crazy. Yeah.
You didn't realize, like, the perception that all these people are just poor and dumb and racist. Like, half of them are college educated, and a pretty large percentage of his non-white supporters were also college educated as well. And many of them, if not on different forms of welfare as well, at minimum, they weren't at the jobs they wanted to be, even if they did everything they felt was right. So for them, I think looking at it as, I'd rather risk and take a chance on the billionaire that potentially knows how to make some money, versus the person who I know doesn't have my best interest in heart economically, because she, as does many of her counterparts, or liberal or Democrat counterparts, they clearly have sold us out. Yeah. So, you know, I think that economically alone, that kind of forced and pushed people to a place to where they felt like, I'd rather risk a chance to be able to put more food on my kitchen table with him than go with something that I know for the last 8 years didn't work.
It's so interesting too, because you bring up the point of like how the disenfranchised, they feel that way because most of the time, often a lot of them don't want to be reliant on the government, and that's not something that's talked about. It's oftentimes people who are like, oh, we're just here to like take from the government so that we can live this like free life of not having to do anything. Like, no, these people don't want to be on that. Yeah, on like that ticket. At least the majority of them. Like
I remember a short period where we're growing up, we were on food stamps as well, and at no point in time did I recall anybody that I knew of, either in my family or friends that I knew of that was going through rough points, wanting to stay there. Yeah. Or one, like, you know. So in reality, it was like, I think that you can't keep I think for the disenfranchised group, you can't keep talking about trying to be economically inclusive, where other people are feeling the strains of less money coming into their household and into their pockets. And for them, Make America Great, I think for the disenfranchised type of Trump supporter, it was about economically getting back to a point to where their grandparents or potentially their parents were, where they could go to school, pay their way through school, come out with little to no debt, and be able to have a house by 30. That was a dream that wasn't that far off, that people that they know of was able to obtain, and it hasn't been the case for them. And, unfortunately, for the last 8 years, much of that time was run by a Democrat, not only in executive, but in the other forms of government. And, jobs continued to go overseas. So there was let's try something different. And when he told them, I'll bring back jobs, whether he was lying or not, I think they believed him.
Yeah, definitely the success of America's Past is a huge influencer in this election, just because that's what the whole election was about, really. Like, what was greatness? Is it still available to us? Can we get back to it? So I definitely agree with you there on those points. And the second group, though, was the traditionalists. So talk me through the traditionalists. What is that? What's tradition, man?
I think that in essence, these are the individuals who, based on tradition and their upbringing and their level of exposure, primarily function using politics is basically a reflection of their social environment. So anyone who, even if it's just in terms of lip service, says I'm a conservative or I'm a Republican, and I believe in the Constitution and the original this and government staying out of that. If you kind of use those talking points, you got their vote. So therefore, they'll excuse anything morally or in terms of ethically, if you, in essence, you can cross your dot your I's and cross your T's, which is like, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I believe in the Second Amendment and the Constitution. If you say the right things, you're good with them. So that means then that you can end up with a George Bush, a Sarah Palin, and a Donald Trump, in the same lifetime in one party. That's what happens, because for them, they really do believe that a conservative perspective in economics, in social policy, in marriage, in you name it, they believe that it's always the best or what best way of making our country better. So therefore, the face of who brings it about, it doesn't matter. For them,
it's just they're so loyal to this image of what they're supposed to be that they just they don't why look beyond that.
The character is second to the ideology that the person is sharing that stands with an R behind her name. Ideology is first. If you can tell me that you're going to do certain things that I believe is what is best for our country, I really don't care whether you sound dumb. I really don't care whether you say at times semi-racist things, or you're kind of tiptoeing the lines of going too far with thoughts about torturing our political or, our country's enemies. It's always centered and rooted in, are the conservative principles that I root for, are those going to be enacted or not?
They're going to be talked about, or those going to be actually seen in legislation. That's cool. That's really interesting because, and then I think I remember in your original article that you were saying how it's just and then further accusing them of being racist was
it makes it worse.
Yeah, it makes it worse. And it solidly roots them in that party.
If I'm telling you my reasons for voting or supporting something, a party or a person or individual is because of policy, or because of my view of the Constitution, or my view of how taxes should be utilized, and you're telling me no, it's because you hate black people or you hate Mexicans, then they're like, you know what? Whatever. Here's my vote, Republicans. Till I die.
Exactly. Because you don't engage with them with what they kind of want to talk about. And then you start name calling them. With not much basis, and it's just, well, guess what? Since you're not willing to have a conversation, I'm just going to continue on with myself.
If you're not coming at traditionalists in the way of, okay, let's really talk about the Constitution. Do you honestly, truly believe that the document it's over 200 years old, not necessarily relevant or irrelevant, is not going to be subject to critique.
Yeah.
Is not going to be subject to have to be modified or have to adjust to the society that is obviously going to be radically different from a time period when it was written when black people were not human.
Yeah.
Or women couldn't vote.
It's like,
you know what I mean? So it's come on.
Exactly.
So when you come at it from that lens, again, a lot of them still won't accept or acknowledge that, but some potentially will. They'll be like, okay, it's true. I'm like, you try writing something that's going to be completely relevant and appropriate 200 years from now.
Yeah. It's hard to say for a lot of reasons.
Especially with how technology in our country and demographics are changing and have changed. Like, no one can predict anything. We don't know what types of issues we're going to be challenging 10 years from now, let alone 200.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're treating the Constitution like the Bible, that's a traditionalist in a nutshell.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, just with, like, human rights and stuff like that, and just, like, talking about where things were, like, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Where now we're even having discussions about, like, artificial intelligences having, like, personhood.
Yep.
Like, that's the scope.
What rights should they be given or administered?
But that's the scope of the difference of times. Like, how could the founding fathers have ever spoke to them?
I'm pretty sure they weren't thinking about sex slaves.
That's what I mean.
Sorry, robot sex slaves.
Like, you got to use the correct terminology here.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, the traditionalist was a huge group of the voters here for Trump. And then this is something that I connect with a lot. The pro-birther party, just the people who, once they hear that abortion is still going to be okay and legal, that's the person that they completely turn away from.
Yeah, the pro-birthers, which is the third type of Trump supporters, in essence, they're basically saying, I will completely reject your platform, what you stand for, and all the good things of policies that you're trying to introduce if you're saying that you will not completely outlaw or ban or, in essence, make it virtually impossible for people to get abortions. That ideology is rooted in a belief system that says life starts at conception. Unfortunately, for this particular crowd, I would say out of all the different types of Trump supporters, they're probably one of the hardest to reach and really get to have really good, I think, conversations with, because this is not a political issue for them. It's a moral one. So when one person is saying, well, I believe that abortion is right in certain instances, another person is saying, well, not really at all. If they think that this is a moral issue, well, it's pretty clear who they're going to go with, regardless if the other person's platform economically and in all these other areas is going to end up harming them in the community they're from. But that abortion
just can't happen.
It can't happen. So unfortunately, like, for me personally, when it comes to like actual science and what we know that 1/3 of all fertilized eggs don't even reach the uterine wall. So what that means, or rather attaches to the uterine wall. So what that means then is, according to their definition of when life begins, which is, at conception, a fertilized egg is life. So 1/3 of all of life, as you're defining it, is being destroyed without any human intervention. But you value life. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't believe, like, for me, it's hard to believe in the concept of there being a God, there being a being that loves and cares about these unborn life forms. And he too, his definition as well, is shared like yours, which is 1/3 of all of humanity I'm going to wipe out before they even attach to the uterine wall to begin to grow.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. So for me, it's very easy to reconcile 1/3 of all fertilized eggs not, being implanted, because probably not actually human yet. Like there might be an additional couple phases or stages of development before that can technically be viewed or counted as life. When you don't do that, then your arguments for abortion should be arguments against God as well.
And it's so hard to be able to even initiate a conversation with these people, like you were saying. Yeah. Because there is no wiggle room. No, there is no phases or stages to be found where there is like a point where life begins. It's always there. Once sex has occurred, there is a baby.
And again, in talking with them, many of them will do one of two things. They will either be like, oh, I didn't really realize or think about that aspect of the 1/3 of all fertilized eggs not even being allowed to continue life, or they'll say, but that's God's choice. Yeah. That's nature. Yeah. As if somehow that makes the quality or value of that now life no longer, it basically is meaningless because, well, that's not us. Yeah. That's not on us. So we don't need to really address that. Exactly. So, unfortunately for Hillary and anyone who probably comes after her, if you're saying anything outside of maybe the life of the mother, saving the life of the mother, there's a good chance you're not going to get these people's support. Yeah. So my hope is that at least within that particular category, more and more people will share the science and evidence like I shared today that lets people know that it's more to it, and there's a reason why a lot of people that you might agree with in a number of different areas, including religion, will have difference of opinions when it comes to this topic.
We just got to talk. Yeah. I think with that group, it's just a matter of discussion on both ends, so that's really cool. Yeah. Thanks for that. The Evangelical Crusaders are the fourth group. Arguably, this is the one that we could talk the most about, I think, probably. Okay. But let's for those who don't know, what is the Evangelical Crusader look like? What does that even mean?
For those who knows what the Crusades were, which I believe occurred around the end of the 11th century, I believe, this was a group that primarily functioned where, because society and the world around them didn't line up to God's will, to what God wanted for humanity according to the Christian perspective, it was their responsibility, in terms of ethics, in terms of politics, in terms of social policy, and even in terms of war, to use any and all means to bring people under the rulership of God. What that means then is that rather than adjusting and acknowledging that our country is ever growing into a multi-cultural, multi-ethnic, pluralistic society where you have to think about other groups and other people, it's we are a Christian nation, and we always are going to be a Christian nation, and we need to get back to that. So that means in our laws, in our policy, in our code of ethics, our normal social norms, we need to get back to a place that propped up being a certain type of evangelical Christian. And then that means anyone and everyone that doesn't line up with that is expendable. So if you're Muslim or gay or or even if you're a Hispanic, if you're an undocumented immigrant, even if you're pro-choice, whatever, it's not about you. It's more about we need to change. We need to change you and get you to a place to where your life reflects and lines up to what we believe Scripture is saying. So in essence, they're taking what they're seeing in the Bible that's being directed towards the people that believe in God and believe in Jesus, and then trying to apply that to the rest of society. Yeah. That, in a nutshell, I think is an evangelical crusader. It's one that approaches politics in such a way where, because they think that all of these different groups are a threat to their religion and their faith, it's free game to target them politically. Yeah. And that's unfortunately a group that I think turns off a lot of people to the church and Christianity, because I think in a nutshell they view this struggle, this back and forth battle is really about trying to obtain power, not for the sake of Jesus, but just using his name to get it. The reason why, it's not that I hate you, it's that God does. It's not that I'm against you, it's that the Bible says I have to be. So regardless of your belief in hell or God's punishment towards whatever. It is in essence, you believe that it's your place to start bringing God's punishment into their lives presently. So rather than allowing God to deal with them in his own way, you know what, God, let's not wait for Judgment Day. Let me start now. Let me start now with how I vote, with how I speak to people, and even how I think.
Yeah.
So if they can obtain power, and their version of making America great is conflating their thoughts about what God wants with their own in society.
It's about having an upper hand, really, for the evangelical crusaders then.
But being always able to point to another source as a reason for why they're voting or doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's never really about me. No, this is what Scripture says. This is what God ultimately wants. Versus, to each his own, unless it's, threatening the life of another human being. They're like, no, you need to believe this too.
Yeah.
So the notion of voluntary faith or people willingly coming to, that's we don't really need that. We just need to change the laws and policies to kind of put people under a certain umbrella until they eventually
law
conform.
Of morality.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's really interesting. I wonder how big that group was. What do you think? I mean,
out of the different groups,
yeah,
I think that
what's the size of this group comparatively to the rest, do you think? We still have one more to cover, obviously.
Now, again, all of these different types, they bleed into each other.
They do, too.
Yeah, so it'd be kind of hard to be like, I'm just solely this or I'm just solely that. But I think that evangelical crusader, it's a lot bigger than we realize.
We want to talk about it,
I in my mind, I think that any evangelical that's really passionate about politics tends to lean in that area.
Yeah.
It's rare that an evangelical Christian is passionate about politics, that's very much interested about the world outside of church, doesn't have these tendencies of trying to force other people by law, by creed, by social norms into acting like a cultural Christian.
Yeah.
It's rare. Yeah. Because the people who don't want to try to force people to do that aren't crusaders.
Yeah.
They're just evangelicals that just go to church, and they try to still love people to the best of their abilities and not try to force people into conforming to a certain way. Like, I know a lot of gay couples, even at my job, and knowing that there's people who think that they should not be allowed to adopt because of the dynamic of same-sex parents. It's like, so you would rather the child suffer and not have any parents because you don't want them having two moms.
Yeah.
Or two dads.
People would say that.
Yeah.
People would say that easy.
And that's where we're at. That's an evangelical crusader. Because your perspective of trying to force a certain type of family into their lives by law, where's the love towards the child? Where's the love of these two individuals who can't have a child, who would like to care for and provide for another human being? That life that you value?
Yeah.
You're like, no.
It's kind of backwards a little bit there.
Yeah, that is an evangelical crusader to me.
Wow. No. Well, we could go on with that category for
a
while.
God.
That's
million categories that could pop up.
But the last and final category that you had listed was the deplorables. So obviously that's kind of a trigger word for a lot of conservative people. They hear deplorable.
Yeah.
And they're like,
listen,
I'm not deplorable.
We're not going to be I'm not going to be disingenuous and act like this group doesn't exist. Yeah. I think the problem was a lot of the people that were using the term and using the word racist was using too broad of a stroke. When in reality, this group is real. Yeah. This group is growing, and they've been growing a lot since 1999 or 1996 or whatever. So the deplorables is anyone that approaches our politics in a fear-based nativistic manner. Nativism, I would say in a nutshell, is when those who view themselves as being views other groups, whether in terms of ethnically or religiously or whomever, they view those groups as being outsiders, and then support policies to try to target those said groups. And nativism throughout American history, it's a part of what America is, and it constantly shifts and changes. And whether it was the Japanese or the Irish or after 9/11, the Muslims, and now the groups that are being targeted a lot is obviously Latinos, Mexicans specifically, Muslims, and even pro-birth women. These are the groups now where they are seen and viewed as a threat. So because of that, in essence, this group now functions where if whoever that threw me off. Whoever speaks and talks in such a way that validates that fear, that validates that angst, that anxiety that those groups bring up in them, they get my vote. So Donald Trump was, in essence, the mouthpiece for a lot of people that harbored that fear and that hate. Yeah. So even if he didn't say, I hate this group or I hate that group, he put out publicly what a lot of them had been saying privately. So in essence, for the first time in over 20 years, somebody is saying externally on the highest level of public office things that probably not only shouldn't be said, but probably shouldn't be thought about their fellow neighbors.
Right. Is nativism racism? Just like across, or is it just kind of
it can bleed into it, but not always.
Okay.
A great example would be, well, first of all, Muslim is not a race.
Yeah.
Right. So, you attributing or thinking that your largest concern in terms of thinking you're going to get killed is from a terrorist that happens to be Muslim, even though you're much more likely to be killed not only by an American citizen, but someone who looks like you. That's nativism, and that's not racism. And a lot of these things or fears, if we're honest, some of it is actually rooted in actual things happening or actual things that they see. If I see a terrorist attack or find out about a terrorist attack, and then I find out three of the individuals that committed the terrorist attack were from out of the country, and they said, they supported Allah or something like that, the liberals, or at least the liberal establishment, will just say they're just terrorists.
Yeah.
And not acknowledge the ideology that pushed these individuals to be there. Whereas the conservative wing, or at least the extreme conservative wing, will be like, they're Muslims. That's why they're terrorists. Somewhere in the middle there's actual Muslim people who aren't terrorists. And it's like 1 billion of them. So let's be real in terms of how many of these people aren't terrorists.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So for them, they tend to just lean more into the side of thinking out of self-preservation, out of fear. So a great parallel to try to look at the nuance, even in racism, is when you hear white individuals like Spencer and all these guys talking about the white race, or not being ashamed to be a white man in this country anymore.
Right.
That's coming from a place of policies from a liberal perspective that for decades has been focusing on helping everyone else out but white males.
Yeah.
Right? So, and if they know that my grandfather had access to certain things, my dad had access to certain things, but it's becoming increasingly harder for me, their perspective is coming from a place, a lot of them, their perspective for them and their community and their family members is coming from a place of self-interest or survival, and thinking of what's going to happen to the future of, if there's 10 jobs, and you're saying by default 2 of those jobs my child cannot have because they're not black or they're not a woman. You're saying my child has only 80% of a chance when my dad or my grandfather had 100%
of the chance. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's interesting.
And I really do think that for a lot of them, they're viewing it in terms of a pie. where they've been taught and told that anytime there's going to be a giving of one slice of pie to another group, the only way that's going to happen, whether it's with taxes, with welfare, with this subsidy, with that form of help, with this form of affirmative action, anytime you're seeing another group getting something, if they're getting it, it's at the expense of you and your community. So in reality, all the people that's at the top, the billionaires, the 1%ers, they're never getting cuts out of their pie. However, if we're living in the same place, working at the same place, doing life together, and you're seeing your paychecks, seem a little smaller than usual, or you're seeing a little increase of jobs here, or it's becoming harder for you over there, you've been taught now, like they've been taught right after slavery, the emancipation of slavery, that any time one group is progressing or getting something, it's only happening at your expense. So that's how all these different politicians can convince these people the reason why you're being paid so low or why there's no more jobs is because of that undocumented person who doesn't have a license, who doesn't have a birth certificate. The reason why you can't make any more or get any more or have access to get any other jobs is because of that individual, which is the furthest thing from the truth. So I don't look at it as... Now, again, some of them will start down that path and eventually lean into places of thinking like other groups are more inferior, or they're not fully human, or they should be treated as less than a person. Clearly they're the far end of the quote unquote race baiters or racists.
But the thing is, though, they'll say that, but they'll say it in their minds, and then they'll speak kind of like words of sugar, which have that in the background. So even though there is the people who will say that there are, like Mexicans are less than human, or like gay people are less than human and stuff like that, there's a huge majority of like this deplorable group who actually do think that way, but won't actually put it on paper.
So a policy will look like one where you don't think about the humanity, or you don't recognize the humanity and the fact that there are families where there are individuals or kids that are born here and their parents were not. And you'll lean in this area if you can't figure out a way to keep that group together. You'll lean in a deplorable area where it's like it is rule of law. We got laws for a reason. If you're not ever thinking about it from that lens, if you don't think about it from the lens of, I know that you're gay and maybe I was brought up or think that spiritually there's some issues there. If you're not thinking about it from the lens of, this law that I want to make your life harder isn't going to make you straighter. It's not. Like, if you're not looking at it in terms of these two individuals that might happen to be the same gender can make the life of another child that has no support system now have one, that's a deplorable in my mind. I've even thought about the parallels between how white individuals function and think about a lot of this stuff and how black people talk about the black community, the state of the black community. And in reality, they're saying a lot of the same messages about needing to support black businesses and thinking about black history and this and that, and it's all black. And the thing is, although they might be saying a lot of the same things, their starting points are coming from two different places, because one group is coming from the place of the oppressed and one is coming from the place of the majority. So from the place of the privileged and the majority, a lot of times that self-interest, that thinking about the white collective, it's coming from a place of fear and a lot of times the way, and because many of them have the power to enact bringing the change that they want, they don't realize that by using that power, a lot of times it's at the expense of the lesser groups. So an example would be voting. Whereas, you ever heard of black people ever trying to figure out ways to make it harder for white people to vote? Like, that's not even a thing. However, we've heard it tons of times in terms of redistricting and gerrymandering, or trying to make it harder for certain groups to kids to come to your schools. You never really hear about that from the lens of black people or Hispanics. And that's the difference. That's the nuance, where they all have varying anxieties about the state of their whole ethnic culture, their group. But the moral place that they're starting from, a lot of times is coming from radically different places. Now, again, there's black extremists, there's white extremists, but a lot of this discussion about race, all these people aren't KKK people.
Yeah.
A lot of them are just simply thinking about it and looking at it from the same lens that a lot of black people are viewing it in regards to the black community, or Hispanics are looking at it from the Hispanic community. So again, I still view a lot of that group as deplorables, because in the end, the foundational component that they care about is not the person or people in general or Americans or their fellow neighbor. It's simply, are you white or not?
Yeah.
And that's it. So for that particular group, Van Jones has an awesome clip. And I do hope that when people watch the clip, they'll realize that this wasn't all of Trump supporters, but it's a growing and large group.
There's another side to this. People have talked about a miracle. I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us. You tell your kids, don't be a bully. You tell your kids, don't be a bigot. You tell your kids, do your homework and be prepared. And then you have this outcome, and you have people putting children to bed tonight, and they're afraid of breakfast. They're afraid of, how do I explain this to my children? I have Muslim friends who are texting me tonight saying, should I leave the country? I have families of immigrants that are terrified tonight. This was many things. This was a rebellion against the elites. True, it was a complete reinvention of politics and polls, it's true. But it was also something else. We've talked about race. We've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income, we've talked about class, we've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president, in part.
And I think for them, Trump was really just a place of political and emotional liberation. He represented all the fears and anxieties that they've held in all this time.
Yeah.
He was the voice that finally said, it's normal to feel how you feel and think how you think. And if nobody else says it, I will. And right, wrong, or indifferent, they finally felt like they had somebody that represented them. And that's the 5 types of Trump supporters.
That is the 5 types indeed. Well, I think we're going to cut it here. This has been great. Thank you again for all of your input. This is fantastic. I love talking about this stuff.
Appreciate it,
but this is New Color Progressives. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Go check out the Patreon, and we'll see you in the next video.
Peace.